He learned her name the day she gave him back his whole life. The thing I remember first isn't her face. It's the sound of water being poured. That particular sound, the hollow knock of a tin ladle against a bucket, the slow pour, the drip after. I was face down in the dirt outside Minnick's livery when she did it, and I heard that sound before I felt the cold against the back of my neck, before I understood I was still alive enough to feel anything. I didn't know her name then. I didn't know much of anything. Let me back up some. My name is Colton Briggs. I was 43 years old that autumn and I looked 60, which wasn't vanity talking, it was arithmetic. I'd earned every one of those extra years the hard way. 2 winters trapping above the Yellowstone when the cold got bad enough to crack iron. 4 years driving cattle up from Texas with men who thought kindness was a liability. And the last stretch, the one that did the real damage, working a claim on the Bitterroot that played out the week I put in my last dollar. The scar on my jaw was from a mule. The one above my eye was from a man, though I don't recall his face anymore and I don't try to. I came to Harlan Creek because my horse went lame 2 miles out and I was too broke to do anything but walk the rest of the way in. Small reasons. The big things in a man's life are mostly small reasons strung together until they look like fate. Harlan Creek was the kind of town that needed a reason to matter and hadn't found one yet. One main street of board-front buildings, a church with a leaning steeple, a saloon with a stovepipe that smoked wrong, and maybe 200 people if you counted generous. The kind of place that watches a stranger come in and waits to see what he is before it decides how to treat him. They decided fast on me. I had nothing. That part was plain enough. No horse, no saddlebags worth mentioning, coat worn through at both elbows. I got work mucking stalls at Minnick's because Herb Minnick was the kind of man who'd hire a scarecrow if it showed up at the right hour, and he was behind on cleaning. He paid me in meals and a corner of the livery floor to sleep on, and I told myself it was temporary, the way I'd told myself that since the Bitterroot. Harlan Creek watched me and filed me away. Drifter, nobody, no account. That was fine. I'd been watched before. I knew how to make myself small enough to keep the peace. I did the work. I kept to myself. I ate what Minnick's wife sent over in the tin pail every evening, whatever was left from supper, usually beans and cornbread, sometimes a piece of salt pork if she'd been in a decent mood. I didn't complain. I didn't drink, which surprised people. A man with nothing and they expected him at the saloon, spending the nothing he had on something that would make the nothing feel further away. I'd done that before too. I knew where it ended. 3 weeks in, Harlan Creek forgot I was there. That's how it goes. A man gets past the first curiosity and then he's just part of the furniture. Then my back went out. It happened on a Tuesday morning when I was hefting a water trough Minnick wanted moved to the far stall. I felt it go, that particular hot snap deep in the left side, the kind that takes your breath before the pain even registers. I set the trough down wrong, or tried to, and ended up on the floor with one leg folded under me and the rest of me not going anywhere. Minnick found me an hour later. He wasn't unkind about it, but he was a businessman. He said if I couldn't do the work he couldn't keep me on. He said it slow and a little apologetic, the way decent men say the hard thing they've already decided. I told him I understood. I made it out of the livery on my own 2 feet, which took some doing. I had maybe $4 and some change in my coat pocket, the accumulated wages of 3 weeks at Minnick's. Not enough for a room, not enough for a horse, enough for 2 days of meals if I was careful and then nothing after that. I sat down in the dirt outside the livery, because I needed to sit, and the ground was what was there. That was where she found me. I didn't hear her come up. The pain had my full attention, the kind of pain that fills up your whole field of interest. I was just trying to breathe through it and figure out what came next when I heard that sound, the ladle, the bucket, the pour. Cold water hit the back of my neck and ran under my collar, and I made a sound I'm not proud of, something between a gasp and a curse, and then I heard a voice. "That's for the heat," she said. "Can you sit up?" I said something. I don't know what. She took it as a yes and put her hand flat against my shoulder blade, just steady pressure, nothing more, and I pushed myself upright and got my back against the livery wall. She was crouched in front of me with the bucket between her feet, looking at my face with an expression that wasn't pity and wasn't alarm. It was just attention. The kind of looking that means someone is actually seeing what's in front of them and not what they expected to find. She was maybe 35, maybe a few years on the far side of that. Dark hair pinned back but not neatly, a long day's worth of coming loose. She was wearing an apron over a blue dress and there was a flour smudge on her left forearm she hadn't noticed. Her eyes were a color I couldn't name exactly. Dark, clear. "You're back," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "What happened to it?" "Trough," I paused, "moved it wrong." She nodded, not like it surprised her. She reached into the bucket and came up with the cloth she'd soaked it with, a strip of old feed sack, and folded it and pressed it against the low left side of my back without asking. It was cold and it helped. "Can you walk?" she said. "In a bit." "Where are you staying?" I didn't answer that right away. The pause was long enough to be its own answer. She didn't say anything. She just stayed crouched there, holding the cold cloth to my back, watching my face. Most people fill a silence like that with their own discomfort. She didn't seem to feel the need. "I was at the livery," I said finally. "Minnick let me go this morning." She took that in, didn't comment on it. "You need somewhere tonight," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'll figure something." "That's not what I asked." I looked at her. She looked back. There was nothing in her face that made me feel like a charity case, which was the thing I was most afraid of. There was just the same clear attention. "My name is Dora Langford," she said. "I run the boarding house on the east side of Mill Street. You've probably seen it, white fence, red door." I had seen it. I'd walked past it 3 or 4 times in my 3 weeks in Harlan Creek and done the math and kept walking. "I can't afford boarding house rates," I said. "I didn't say I was charging you rates." She stood up, folding the cloth over the edge of the bucket. "I've got a room off the kitchen, small. It's where my hired man used to stay before he went east. I need someone to do light work while that back heel's sweeping, hauling small things, tending the garden. Nothing that'll put you back on the ground. It's not wages exactly, but it's a room and 3 meals." I stared at her. "Why?" I said. She picked up the bucket. "Because I need the help and you need the room, and it's a Tuesday afternoon, and I haven't got time to be philosophical about it. Can you walk or do you need my arm?" I could walk. It was slow and it was unpleasant, but I could walk. I walked with her to the boarding house on Mill Street and she showed me the room off the kitchen, and I sat down on the edge of the cot she had in there and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Walls. A door that closed. The smell of someone's cooking coming under the crack. She had something on the stove already, something with onion and sage. I sat there for a long minute after she left. Then I lay down on that cot and looked at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time I'd had a roof over my head that wasn't a livery floor or a canvas tent, and I couldn't place it. I fell asleep before I meant to. She woke me for supper by knocking twice on the door, not opening it, just knocking. That seemed important. A small courtesy that some people don't think to offer a man who's got nothing. Supper was her and 2 of her boarders. An older man named Pruitt who sold dry goods and spoke mostly in weather observations, and a young schoolteacher named Felton who was new to the territory, and still had the look of a man who hadn't figured out yet that the territory wasn't going to change for him. She fed us all the same: pork and onion stew, biscuits, a wedge of dried apple pie that was mostly apple and a little pie. I ate slowly because my back was bad enough that sitting at a table took concentration. I didn't talk much. Neither did she, not any more than was polite. But once, when Pruitt was going on about the cold front coming down from the north, I caught her watching me the way she'd watched me in the dirt outside the livery, that plain, clear attention, and she didn't look away when I caught her at it. Just went back to her plate. I told myself she was watching to make sure I wasn't going to be a problem. That was a reasonable thing to watch for. The work she gave me was light. She was honest about that. It was all she trusted me for at first, and she was right to be cautious. Sweeping the front walk, carrying the small coal bucket from the shed to the kitchen stove, weeding the garden along the south side of the house, which I could do from a crouch without putting strain on the bad muscle. She watched how I moved without being obvious about it, and when she saw me wince at something, she'd quietly assign me something else the next morning without making a thing of it. She had a method to running that house that was worth watching. She was up before anyone, winter dark still outside, and she had the stove going and the first pot started before Pruitt came down for his coffee. She kept accounts in a ledger she left open on the kitchen table, and she reviewed it every night after supper. She fixed things herself when they could be fixed and hired out only when they couldn't. When the east window jammed in its frame, she worked at it herself for half an hour before she asked me if I'd try. I tried. I got it open. She said thank you and went back to what she was doing, and that was the end of it. No fuss. No making me feel like I'd done something remarkable. My back healed in about 2 weeks. Not all the way, it never went all the way back to what it was, and truth be told, what it was before wasn't so impressive, but well enough to do real work again. I told her so. I said I could take on more if she needed it. There's wood to split, she said. The shed out back. Pruitt can't do it and I've been putting it off. I split wood for 2.5 days straight. It was cold by then, early November, and the cold was the kind that settles in and means business. I worked in my coat and could still see my breath. There was something good about it, the repetition, the clean splitting of the wood, the pile growing against the shed wall. I hadn't had work I was good at in a long time. I forgot for stretches what I was doing there, what I was. I was just doing the work. She brought me coffee once. Came out with 2 cups and set one on the splitting stump and drank the other herself, standing there watching the way the light was going in the west. Cold front. Pruitt was after his coming, she said. Looks like it. She drank her coffee, I drank mine. You're not from around here, she said. Not like she was asking, she already knew. Like she was opening a door a crack and leaving it up to me. Colorado originally, I said. A long time ago. You've been moving a while. Yes, ma'am. She looked at me. You don't have to call me that. What would you prefer? Dora, she said, and picked up my empty cup when I was done and went back inside. It took me a moment before I could make my hands start working again. Not because of anything dramatic, just because it had been a long time since someone had told me their name like it was an invitation. The winter came in hard. 3 of her boarders left before Christmas, 2 for family farther east, 1 for reasons that weren't explained. That left Pruitt and me and the schoolteacher Felton, and by February even Felton was talking about heading back to Ohio when his school term finished in spring. The money was tighter, and I could see it in the way she did the ledger at night, the particular stillness she had when the numbers weren't cooperating. I started doing more without being asked, tending the stove at night so the pipes wouldn't freeze, patching the roof on the woodshed where a seam had opened, fixing the gate latch that had been broken since before I arrived. I wasn't doing it to make myself useful in some self-serving way. I did it because the house was working and I'd started to feel, quietly and without examining it too carefully, that I wanted it to keep working. One night in late January, I came in from banking the coals in the outdoor fire pit and found her at the kitchen table with the ledger closed and her hands flat on the cover and her eyes somewhere else. She didn't hear me come in. I stood in the doorway for a moment, and then I made a noise, cleared my throat, and she looked up. "I'm sorry," she said. "I was somewhere else." "It's late." I know. She didn't move. I went to the stove and poured what was left of the evening's coffee into a cup and set it in front of her without asking if she wanted it, and then I sat down across the table, which was something I hadn't done before. She was always working at that table, and I was always passing through. She looked at the cup, then she picked it up with both hands. "It's the spring," she said. "If Felton goes in the spring and I don't get new boarders by April, I'm short." "Short how much?" She told me a number. It was real money, but not ruinous money, not if things turned. "What's your occupancy been in summers past?" "Better, summer's always better. It's the shoulder that's hard late winter, early spring, before the cattle work starts and people start moving." I thought about it. "What would you need, one boarder or two?" "One solid one would do it, two would be comfortable." "I can write to Herb Minnick," I said. "He gets drifting workers through, seasonal men who need somewhere to stay when the weather's too bad to camp. He might know someone who wants a room through March." She looked at me. "You'd do that?" "I'd write a letter." "Colton," she said it plain, "you know what I mean." I looked back at her. "I know what you mean." She put her hands around the cup again, both of them, and looked down at it. "You've been good for this place," she said. "I want you to know I see that." I didn't know what to do with that, so I didn't do anything. I just sat there. "I didn't have anyone to count on before," she said. "Not since my husband. It's been 4 years. I didn't know you were widowed." "Most people know." A small, dry sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "It's a small town." "I don't pay much attention to what people know about each other," I said. "I try to go on what I see for myself." She looked up at me then, really looked, and there was something in her face I hadn't seen before, not the plain attention I was used to, but something behind it. Something she'd been keeping behind it. "What do you see?" she said. I thought about how to answer that honestly. "A woman who runs a tight operation alone and doesn't ask for help she doesn't need," I said. "Someone who does things right even when no one's looking. Someone who poured cold water on a stranger in the dirt, because it was the right thing to do, and didn't think too long about it." She was quiet for a moment. "What do you think people see when they look at you?" she said. I laughed, not with much feeling. "Nothing worth mentioning." "That's wrong," she said. It came out level and certain, no softness in it, just the fact of it. "That's wrong, Colton." I didn't answer. "I've watched you all winter," she said. "You work harder than any man I've hired, and you've never once let me notice. You fix things before I know they're broken. You're decent with Pruitt even when he's intolerable. You don't drink, you don't complain, you don't—" She stopped. Started again, quieter. "You act like a man who thinks he doesn't deserve to take up space, and I don't know the whole of why that is, but I see it, and I think you should know somebody sees it." The kitchen was quiet, the stove ticked. I had a feeling in my chest that I didn't have a name for. Not quite gratitude, not quite grief. Something in between that had been waiting to move for a long time. "The room off the kitchen," I said. "I want to be clear that I know you've been more than fair." "Colton, I'm just saying. Stop apologizing for being here." Her voice was still level, but there was something underneath it that wasn't. "Stop apologizing for taking up space in my house. You earn your place. You have since the first week. I want you to hear that." I looked at her, she looked back. The lamp between us put the same light on both our faces. "I wrote Minnick," I said finally. "I know you did. I sent it Monday." "I know." A pause. "Thank you." I nodded. I stood up and told her good night and went to the room off the kitchen and lay down on the cot in the dark. My back had been quiet most of the winter. I noticed it sometimes only when the weather changed. Minnick came through. He knew a pair of brothers, seasonal ranch hands who needed winter quarters while the cattle work was slow, and by the second week of February both of them were at Dora's table eating her pork and onion stew and paying their weekly rate. The ledger balanced. I watched her close it one night and let out a breath that was quiet but real, and I felt something I recognized as my own relief. Spring came the way it does in that country, all at once, overnight almost, the ground going from iron to mud in a single week. Felton finished out his school term and shook all our hands and went back to Ohio, and one of the brothers took a job on a ranch south of town that came with bunkhouse quarters. And then it was late April, and the house had emptied down to Pruitt and me, and the two new boarders Dora had picked up in March. A mining surveyor working a contract nearby, and a woman named Harker who was waiting for her daughter to come up from New Mexico. I was still in the room off the kitchen. She'd never asked me to take one of the real rooms. I'd never offered to move. Neither of us mentioned it. One evening toward the end of April, when the days had gotten long enough that the light was still going at supper time, I was mending a fence post along the south side of the yard. The frost heave had worked a couple of them loose, and she came out with her coffee cup and stood on the back step watching me work. "You plan to stay?" she said. I drove the post down a little further and checked it set. "Do you want me to?" That's not an answer. I stood up and turned around. She was leaning against the door frame with her cup in both hands, the way she always held it, and the light was doing something particular to her face, long, slanted, going gold. "I'd like to stay," I said, "if you're asking what I want." "I am." I leaned on the fence post. "Then yes." She drank her coffee. "The room off the kitchen doesn't have a real window," she said. "There's the upstairs corner room, Felton's old one, that gets the morning light." "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't." I looked at her. She was looking back at me with that same clear attention, and behind it was the thing I'd seen that night in the kitchen, and she wasn't keeping it behind the attention anymore. "Dora," I said. "Colton." I put down what I was holding and came across the yard and stood in front of her on the back step. She was 2 steps up, which put us level. I could smell coffee and wood smoke and the particular clean smell of her hair. "I need you to know," I said, "that I don't have much." "I know what you have." "I'm saying it plain." "So am I." She reached up and put her hand flat against my jaw, the scarred side, the one people usually didn't look at, and held it there. Her hand was warm. There was nothing tentative about it. "I know what I see when I look at you," she said. "I've known it since January, since longer maybe." I put my hand over hers, just held it there. "I don't know your name very well yet," I said, which was a strange thing to say, and I didn't know why I said it. It just came out. She looked at me. "Yes, you do," she said. "You've known it since October." "Not the way I want to." She didn't answer that with words. She stepped down off the step and into the yard, so we were standing level and she was close, and she put both hands on my face, the scarred side and the other, and looked at me the way she'd looked at me in the dirt outside the livery. Plain, clear, seeing what was actually there. "Then learn it," she said. "I'm old now. My back is bad most mornings, and I walk with a hitch that wasn't there in my 40s. Pruitt died years back, a cold in February that his lungs couldn't shake. The mining surveyor is still in the territory, and he still sends Christmas cards, which I find surprising and also not surprising. The boarding house is still standing. The red door is a different shade than it was. She repainted it one summer, a darker red because the first had faded. The fence along the south side is new posts throughout. I replaced them one by one over the years as the old ones gave out. She's next to me most mornings at the kitchen table with the ledger, which is a different ledger now than the one she had when I came. Full to the last page 3 times over since then. She still closes it the same way, both hands flat on the cover, holding what's in it, and I still notice. My name is Colton Briggs. I was a man who'd lost everything and figured it was the shape of things, the way a river cuts its channel and you accept the direction it goes. I spent a long time being the thing a town files away and forgets. No account. Nobody. There are mornings I think about the man I was that October afternoon, sitting in the dirt outside Minnick's livery with a bad back and $4 in my coat, and the particular sound of a tin ladle against a bucket. She didn't know me then. I didn't know her. She came out of nowhere and poured cold water on the back of my neck and asked me if I could walk. And when I said I could, she took me at my word and let me do it on my own. That's still the woman she is. I learned her name the day she gave me back my life. Dora. It took me all winter to understand what I had, and all spring to understand what she saw when she looked at me, and somewhere between the back step and the fence post and the long April light I stopped being the man who'd given up on being worth something. She did that. She stayed clear-eyed and patient, and she told me the truth about myself on a night in January when the stove was ticking, and the ledger was closed and nobody was pretending anymore. That's the story. It's a quiet one, I know. No gunfight, no burning building, no dramatic rescue out of a flood. Just a man sitting in the dirt and a woman with a bucket and a long winter in a small house, and the gradual, undramatic thing of someone seeing you and choosing not to look away. I kept the room off the kitchen for the first year. By the second spring, she'd changed the ledger entry from Briggs Labor to something I saw once when she'd left it open, and she didn't know I'd looked. She'd written it in her careful hand in the left margin, outside the accounting columns, where the numbers didn't go. Just my name, and then hers beneath it. That's still there in the first ledger on the shelf in the kitchen. I know because I've looked at it a few times over the years when she wasn't watching. Not often, just enough to remember that it's real. The morning light comes in the upstairs corner room and wakes me early. I lie there a minute before I get up, listening to the house. The particular creak the third stair makes, the sound of the stove drafting in the kitchen, the way the wind comes around the east side in the mornings and finds the loose shingle on the back slope of the roof that I keep meaning to fix and keep not getting to. All the small sounds of a place that's yours. I didn't know her name that first afternoon. I knew it by evening when she called us all to supper and Pruitt said, "Thank you, Mrs. Langford." And she said, "Dora, please," how many times with that dry patience she had for him. But knowing a name and knowing what it holds are different things. I didn't know what her name held until she put her hands on my face in the April light and said, "Then learn it." I didn't know until that moment, standing in the yard with the fence post behind me and her looking at me with no pity and no performance, just the plain fact of her choosing. I didn't know until then that a man could be seen clearly, down to all the damage and the nothing, and still be the thing someone reached for. That's the day I really learned her name. 42 years ago this October. I still know it.